Now, last night, France qualified for the knockout stages of the European Championships. 2 goals were scored by Karim Benzema, a forward of Algerian descent who had been banned from the national team for 5 years because of a scandal, which we may come to. But the relationship between this French team and the French people at home is not quite the same as, for example, the relationship between the Danish team and their own crowd, which we all saw earlier this week. The passion that the Danes showed, we know from our own experience here, how success at a major tournament can bring joy to a nation. And to the English, well, that's another story, but they all do get behind their national team. It isn't quite the same in France, and it's a pleasure now to welcome to the stand one of the most admired writers in Europe, in fact. Simon Kuper is a contributor to the Financial Times on sport and other matters. He lives in Paris and he joins us from Paris now. Simon, the good news, of course, for those of us who admire this French team is that they're through to the knockout stages and they play Switzerland, who they should beat. So last night was a good night. But reading between all the lines, the relationship between the people of France and this French team, and indeed the French team that won the World Cup in 1998, it isn't quite the same, is it, as elsewhere?
No, I mean, the French took a long time to really care about, to embrace their national team, because, of course, there were so many other things the French were proud of that they invested national pride in, you know, their superpower status in the past, their feeling that they had this global civilization. And it's only in 98 that viewing figures start to rise, that most of the population, you know, even watches the World Cup final. And in 98, they won with this multicultural team, and people thought that that created healing, that meant that people of non-white backgrounds could be accepted as French, that it would make France a more cohesive society. It didn't happen at all. The far-right Front National, the Rassemblement National, has done very well over the last 20 years. And what you see is that a large part of the population, probably more than a third, is not happy that there are non-white players in the national team, is always agitating against these players, especially when one of them does something wrong off the field or on the field. And so they do not accept that someone like Karim Benzema, who, as you say, is of Algerian origin, they just don't accept that he is French.
Yes, and I noted in the last recent games, during the singing of the national anthem, Didier Deschamps, the coach, who was captain of that team that won the World Cup and indeed went on to win the European Championships, he sang it with passion, and it was interesting to see. Not all of the players sang with the same passion, and I wonder about that. Is that a reflection of their, shall we say, indifference to the jersey, or is it a reflection on a feeling that they understand that they're not really belonging to the nation or even fully representing the nation? And it isn't just Benzema, although he is an interesting exception, isn't he?
Well, he has become the villain of the piece for the far right, because he was involved in a scandal where he was trying to helped some thugs blackmail a former France player, Mathieu Valbuena, about a sex tape on which Valbuena had been recorded. And so Benzema is actually going on trial for that in the autumn, finally. That's why he was kicked out of the team in 2015. So he's been a bad boy off the field. He was once filmed spitting at the end of the Marseillaise. But I mean, look, I think you yourself have written about how in the Ireland team in the 70s, some players didn't know the national anthem. They'd grown up in England. Yes. They didn't particularly have, strong feelings about Ireland. I mean, I wonder in general how many players today are sort of weeping with inner patriotism when they hear the anthem, I also think it's a very stressful situation. You know, there you are, you're about to, in 2 minutes' time, you're going to play this huge match. You're trying to concentrate on your role, on your task. And then this 18th century song comes past, which they have had to memorize because, you know, the French Federation is very, very anxious that the players be seen as good patriots. So, I mean, I think it's a strange expectation that the players should sing the national anthem as if they're going out to battle, but it's certainly an expectation that many French people have. Do the players think they're French? I mean, I asked Kylian Mbappé this. I interviewed him in April, and I said, you know, now of course you're a French hero, but when you were growing up as a young black kid in the suburbs of Paris, did you always feel you were accepted as French? And he said, every moment of my life, I have felt that I was French, and nobody has ever made me feel that I was not French. And you saw in 2018 when Trevor Noah, the American South African comedian, made that joke that Africa had won the World Cup because, you know, most of the players came from African background. The players themselves didn't like that at all. They felt it was suggesting they weren't really French. And I mean, Mbappé says, look, I'm proud of my background. His father's Cameroonian in origin. His mother's Algerian in origin, though she was born in France herself. But he said, that doesn't make me less French. And I think it's a very sort of risky thing. And that when someone like Trevor Noah suggests that these players in some way are more African than French.
Can we go back to 98? I have I had a home in France for 30 years in Deauville. I've been going there every summer for over 30 years, 32 years. I know France very well. And I always am shocked, frankly, Simon, by the overt racism that one encounters, including using certain words that would be unthinkable in an Irish context in particular. What's happening in France right now around immigration and race and crime and all of that very much feeds into the mood of people when they look at the team. Is that a fair observation?
I mean, look, there's great French anxiety about the fact that France is now a multicultural country, and people associate that with France being, you know, Europe's leading terrorist target. You know, I live 8 minutes walk from the Bataclan, the nightclub where in 2015, 90 people were gunned down by terrorists. And so, yeah, for many people, there is a conflation between their fears of terrorism, fears of crime, and then the national football team is composed largely of non-white young men from the banlieue, from the suburbs of the big cities, especially Paris and Lyon. And non-white young men from the banlieue are exactly the demon figures for the far right.
Yes.
And then in the football, these non-white young men have also gone abroad very young in life, have not really lived in France much, and have become multimillionaires. So, you know, as you know, having spent all this time in France, other French buttons that are very sensitive are rich people. That annoys a lot of French people. And then expats who, you know, so these young men have grown up in the banlieue, which are very far from the French mainstream, and then they've left the country. So for the far right, they're kind of a dream target when they do badly.
Now, in 1998, as you referenced earlier, Simon, it was, first of all, it was a great victory. Zidane and Deschamps himself, who was the captain of that team, Thierry Henry, also came through in that period. There was a feeling, a very strong desire on many people's part that this would be a healing, this would be a blow against racism. How did it all evaporate, that sort of joyous and optimistic mood?
Well, I mean, I think one of the lessons is that all World Cups evaporate, that the joyous mood when you win something, it just doesn't last. It becomes a memory of a moment, but it doesn't change your society. I think World Cups and the national football team in many countries are a way to understand your society, to talk about it. So, for example, in Ireland in the 80s, when you had a national team composed very largely of the diaspora, that was a way that helped Irish people understand what kind of nation they were. You know, that the diasporic nature of Ireland was brought to life by those 11 men. And the
Yes.
kind of multicultural nature of France was brought to life by Les Bleus in 1998. But, life goes on, and people are discontented. I mean, the story of France is a lot like the story of Britain in the post-war, that you go from being a superpower, then France has this exceptional humiliation in Algeria, which is considered part of its own territory, not just a colony. It loses Algeria after a bloody war in which the French are torturers. So it's kind of the French Vietnam. And like Britain, you come out at the other end, much wealthier than you were in the 30s and 40s, but sort of no longer the big guy on the world stage. And so then you look around for people to blame for that. And in Britain, that became Brexit. And in France, that means that there is a far right that draws about, close to 30% of the vote.
Let me ask you about Mbappé. He is the heir presumptive to Messi and Ronaldo as one of the greatest players of all time. Of course, it's a bit early to be saying that, but people believe it and hope for it, really. He seems a remarkable person. Not just the answer he gave to your question, but the way he conducts himself on the field. And there's a sort of an almost Buddhist vibe of him. He's a highly intelligent young fella and a great, great player, potentially the next great, great player.
He is a very bright young man. He also, unusually for a footballer who at 16 was already playing for Monaco first team, he actually finished his baccalaureate, which is the equivalent of A-levels. I can't remember what you call it in Ireland.
Yes.
But so we
call it the leaving cert. I don't know why. Probably because you leave the country at that stage.
He got his leaving cert, if you like, which is unusual. He's a very bright fellow to interview. I mean, he actually talked about Messi and Ronaldo, and he said, look, when I take the field, I tell myself I'm the best player in the world, because he said, you've got to give yourself confidence. You've got to build yourself up, because nobody is going to do it for you in football. But he said, so I tell myself that, but I know, he says, that Messi and Ronaldo will always be better than me. He says it's just not a comparison that one could possibly make, to imagine that you could be Messi or Ronaldo. So, yeah, I mean, he might be the best player of his generation, but there won't be another Messi or Ronaldo for a time yet. I think he's a wonderful kind of figurehead for the French team, because he does come across as so well. And what struck me also is, I go to the banlieue, to the suburbs of Paris most weekends when there's not a pandemic. I take my son, sometimes my daughter, to play football there. Most of their games are away in the suburbs. And so we go to these Parisian suburbs, and I've been dozens and dozens of times, and I always have a walk around before the match. And I've never been to one that's entirely non-white. It's always a mix. It's always a mix of white and black and brown. And you go to this wonderful sports complex with artificial fields where there's coaches with diplomas, and around it there's little houses or social housing flats, which usually look fine. So often the suburbs are drab, but these are not hellholes at all. The States is very much present. And why do they produce the best footballers in the world? Because, you have these coaches with diplomas, including Mbappe's father, including Mbappe's uncle. So he grew up in changing rooms from the age of 4, listening to tactical talks.
Yes.
And he said, look, I can think like a coach on the field. I can think, what is my teammate's problem? Why is he not functioning? Whereas he said most footballers can only think of themselves in a game. And Pogba, similar story, also extremely bright chap. I know that in Britain he sort of has this bad reputation, but I find him a very impressive man. He's also the leader of the Bleu, even though he's not captain. And, Pogba, he grew up with his two brothers who both became professionals, being coached by their dad, as a kind of private enterprise. The dad taught them.
Yes.
Taught them football. So there's a lot of kind of places to play, a lot of coaching, a good schooling. So a lot of Mbappe's relatives are school teachers. So he had an aunt who would teach him English as well outside school. So he speaks very good English and Spanish. Right.
Just for people who are listening to this who might hope to see Mbappé playing in the Premier League, in your view, Simon, if you have a view, is he more likely to go to Liverpool perhaps, or Manchester City, or will he go to Spain, where the two super clubs really don't have the players or the money and don't look that they're going to have them anytime soon. Do you have a hunch as to where he might want to play?
What I know is that the family is very structured and organised in how they think these things through. So they don't go for the biggest offer. When he was 16, a bit younger, they took him to Monaco because they thought that's the quickest route to the first team. And later they decided that Paris Saint-Germain was the wise step. You know, they're always in a situation where they can choose. It won't be Barcelona because Barcelona just has no money at all. I've just finished writing a book about Barcelona, which, you know,
Really?
I would love to come back and talk to you about it one day.
Well, please, yeah, we'd love to have you back because we're Barca fan. The Barcelona, if you like, tragedy is probably a strong word, but it is a basket case, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, there's just no money. The debt is over 1.2 billion something. Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time there. I wrote this book that came out in August. They just can't buy anyone like Mbappé. So yeah, you're probably talking about City or maybe Liverpool or Real Madrid. And I think he's going to evaluate this is the big move I make. If you're a nippy striker, 22 is not young, really. It's your prime.
Yes.
You're not making a step up. This is the big step you're going to make in your career. It has to be to the best club where you're going to win all the prizes, which he's very much about, winning prizes. So I don't know. I mean, if you were him, would you choose probably not Liverpool, but yeah, I would think probably City more than Real Madrid.
I think aesthetically Liverpool is not the place for someone from Paris to go, but I would think this, Simon, if he stays playing for PSG in a weak league, in a team that is, even though Lille beat them, in a team that is superior to most of its opponents, I think his development might stall. He does need bigger challenges now. If he stays at PSG for another season, which I've seen people speculate he might do, that would be, in my view, an error.
Yeah, I mean, I put this to him. I said, look, you're too good a player for the Ligue 1. And he sort of ummed and awed and didn't deny it. And he said, look, it's not the best league in the world, but it's important that as a French person, I stayed here and helped build the league, which I think was slightly disingenuous. I think he stayed for career development reasons.
Yes.
But, I mean, yeah, I think he understands he can't keep playing against, teams like Guingamp and Nice. It's just not going to help him.
Now, another player who we adore here in these islands is N'Golo Kante. Again, someone who came, I think, from the banlieue, Parisian, a modest background, should we say, and is possibly at this moment the best midfield player in the world. Yeah,
I mean, he is astonishing. I used to think he was a brilliant defensive midfielder, but it turns out he's also a wonderful attacking midfielder with a nice little dribble, which I think he just didn't permit himself early on. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the story of Kante, but also Griezmann, how the French system has changed, because neither of these guys got into a professional youth academy when they were teenagers. Griezmann was rejected by about 6, had to go to Real Sociedad in Spain to, have a professional career, because he was too small. And French football at the time in the 2000s was very much about power. And so Kante didn't get into any professional club. At 19, Boulogne, which was a lower division club, gave him an amateur contract, and he took it from there. So, now French football is very much changed. Ironically, it's sort of modeled itself on FC Barcelona, the coaching. So it's now about trying to produce players like Kante and Griezmann. Yeah, I mean, if Kante wins the Euro, I mean, he is also coming to the end. If Kante wins the Euro, then it will be hard, I think, to deny him the Ballon d'Or this year.
Now, what's difficult for us to get our heads around is how or why the people we've talked about, Mbappé and Kante in particular, would not be taken to the hearts of the nation and admired greatly. Yet there is this sort of shadow over France, is there not? And it's almost a permanent shadow of Marine Le Pen, her movement, and the degree to which it's supported. Nowhere in Europe hardly can one imagine a party like that commanding, I think in the latest opinion poll, 52-48. The 52 for Macron, the 48 for Le Pen. How daunting is that for these players and people like them, their families and people who don't tick all the nationalist boxes?
Yeah, I mean, it's the spectre that's been hanging over France for 20 years since her father, Jean-Marie, reached the second round of the presidential elections in 2002. And before then, they've been seen as a fringe party. The expectation for years now has been that in 2022, at the next elections, the runoff, which is always the two top candidates, will be Le Pen against Macron. And Macron wants that because he wants to run against her in the final round. And in 2017, when that happened, it was about 66% Macron. So it was a landslide victory. I'm still confident that Macron would win that. I mean, the poll you cite where he got 52, she got 48, that did happen, but that was an outlier. It's clear that she's stronger now in the polls than in 2017. But we just had the regional elections last weekend where she got a disappointing vote share. But also significantly, only a third of the population turned out. I mean, right now, I think the mood in France is quite euphoric. I've never seen this in nearly 20 years here. But of course, we're coming out of the pandemic. The weather is lovely. The terrasses are full. The economy is picking up. So people feel pretty good about the government. The vaccine rollout was very slow at first. It's now been brilliant. And, I took my kids to be vaccinated yesterday. It was quite moving. There was the town hall of the 10th arrondissement was, full of people, and these civil servants and nurses would come out and they called names. And it was always a name of a different ethnic origin. Monsieur Diop, Monsieur Weizmann, Madame Dos Santos. So, and all these people, it's kind of Paris at its best. That mixité, as French call it. And so it's really working. Things have got a lot better. Macron's, it's always said that Macron is unpopular, which is true, but every French president is unpopular. So his predecessor, Hollande, at one point had a favorability rating of 4%. And Macron now is somewhere between 40 and 50%. So for a French president, that's not bad.
Yeah, and no French president has been re-elected since 2002. And that was Jacques Chirac.
Yeah, Chirac was the last one he was sort of liked. Yeah, he was seen as a kind of good old boy. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you just a few more questions, Simon. One of them about that and I'm sure our listeners will be interested in. During the last presidential election, Marine Le Pen debated Emmanuel Macron, and it was car crash, I understand, from her point of view. Could you confirm that, and could you tell us what went wrong for her? Because apparently she just couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, she is not a very bright woman. We interviewed her recently with the Anglo-American Press Association here in Paris, where we did this kind of group interview with her on Zoom, and that became clear again. And Macron is a very bright lad, whatever you think of him. And so what he wanted to show was that she was not capable of running a country, which, of course, Hillary tried to show with Trump, and that didn't work out so well.
Yes.
But the French seemed to be more serious. So she started to say how, he said to her, how can you abolish the euro? It's just going to be a nightmare. And she said, well, you can have a euro that businesses use, but consumers don't use the euro. And he said that's ridiculous. And he, gave this explanation of how kind of basic money works. And then she got confused about a leading French company, Thomson. She didn't remember what sector they were in, and he put her right on that.
Right.
And so she just kind of showed that she's not the kind of person you would want behind the big desk.
Yes.
And I mean, when we interviewed her, what struck me is the one thing she's very good on is kind of polling and political trends. So she was very good on talking about the kind of decline of the socialist centre left and the decline of the centre right. She'd be a great political sophologist, but she's not somebody you want running, your local shop.
Now, Macron is curious. He's a man without a party. Is that right? And hence the poor performance last week. En Marche don't have a history, do they?
He founded them. He founded the party, yeah.
Yes, but no roots in any community constituency, which makes but perhaps not so much in France. But it does make things rather precarious, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, France does have a lot of local, regional government. In every village, there is a big town hall with a mayor who gets to make some decisions. And En Marche is not really represented outside the Élysée Palace. So, they haven't managed to build up a movement that wins, town halls all over the country. And it's very much tied to him. So En Marche, the initials are EM, and people pointed out that it seemed like a bit of a narcissistic personal vehicle, so they changed them to LRM, La République En Marche.
Yes.
It's very much, En Marche is the Macron party, and the people it attracted are the small constituency of French optimists, people who like globalization, who feel things are going well, who live in the thriving cities of places like Paris, Toulouse, Lyon, Bordeaux. And these are very much a minority in the French population. It's about a quarter, 30%, but it was enough to ride to victory because the centre-right and centre-left imploded. So, it's if Macron, is hit by a bus tomorrow, I don't think there will be a République En Marche party anymore.
And a final question, Simon. Will France win the European Championship, do you think? And if they do, how will they be greeted when they return home, bearing in mind the way the team of 98 were greeted as national heroes, really, but as you say, it evaporated, it doesn't last. How will it be greeted? For example, Angela Merkel attended the final of, or a big game in the last World Cup when Germany were playing. She is a football fan. Macron doesn't seem to be. Will they win, and will it help Macron in his quest for the retained presidency next spring?
Gosh, that's a lot of questions. Okay, my predictions are terrible. I have no idea who's going to win. France do look beatable, but what I would say is that what we do know now is they have the best players. I mean, nobody else has Mbappé, Pogba, Kante, Benzema, one or two. Griezmann hasn't been great this tournament, but still, I mean, they have the best players. Will they win? I don't know. If they win, I mean, the French have learned by now that winning these trophies doesn't transform your nation. It's a moment, and it goes away. After winning the World Cup, the Euro is a bit of a blip. Macron will definitely be there. I agree that he's not a big football fan, but he sort of pretends to be. He talks about being a Marseille fan, and he was at the World Cup final kind of standing on his desk and cheering. And he will try and wrap himself in the colours. But it's not going to change France. If they win the Euro, it's going to be back to business 3 days later.
Okay, Simon, we're very grateful to you for joining us. Simon Kuper is a regular contributor to the Financial Times. On Saturday, his column, it isn't just a good column, it's a really wonderful newspaper, maybe the best one being published in England right now. We're grateful to Simon.